The letter arrived on a Thursday morning. I almost didn't open it. It was in a cream envelope, slightly thicker than usual, with the name of a solicitor's firm printed in the top left corner. Formal. Official. The kind of envelope that sits on a kitchen counter while you make the school run and put a wash on and pour yourself a second cup of tea. Because you know, the way you know certain things without being able to explain why, that whatever is inside, it is going to require your full attention. My son Jake was at nursery. My daughter Lily was at school. The house was quiet in that particular way it only is between 9 and 3, a silence that belongs entirely to you, that you have earned through the noise of every other hour. I sat down at the kitchen table. I opened the envelope. It was a letter from a solicitor informing me that my father-in-law's estate had been finalized, that the assets had been distributed according to the amended will, that my children Jake, then 2 years old, and Lily, then 5, had been removed as beneficiaries 18 months prior at the request of my mother-in-law Diana. 18 months prior. I sat with that for a moment. 18 months prior, I had been in a hospital delivery room bringing Jake into the world. I had been there for 11 hours. Tom had held my hand. The midwives had been kind. At 3:17 in the morning, Jake had arrived red-faced and furious and absolutely perfect. And while I was doing that, while I was bringing a new life into the world, Diana had driven to a solicitor's office and changed her husband's will. She had removed my children. She had done it quietly, efficiently, with the particular deliberateness of someone who had been planning it for a long time and had simply been waiting for the right moment. The right moment, apparently, was the night her grandchildren were being born. My name is Sarah. I am 34 years old, and this is the story of the most calculated betrayal I have ever witnessed, and the most unexpected, quietly satisfying ending I could not have predicted. Before I take you back to where this all began, if you're new here, welcome. This is her Breaking Point Stories. Every week, a real story about the moment a woman stopped being silent and chose herself. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. I met Tom at a friend's birthday dinner when I was 26. He was sitting at the opposite end of a long table in a restaurant that was slightly too loud and slightly too dark, the kind of place chosen for atmosphere over acoustics. I noticed him because he was the only person at the table who wasn't performing, wasn't projecting a version of himself designed for a social occasion. He was just there, present, listening to the person beside him with what looked like genuine interest. I thought, that is someone worth knowing. We were introduced properly after dessert. He was 32, an engineer, warm and unhurried in the way that some people are, not lazy, not slow, just comfortable in their own skin. We talked for an hour in the narrow corridor by the restaurant's coat rack while everyone else was saying their goodbyes, and by the time we left I knew 2 things. 1, I wanted to see him again. 2, he came from the kind of family that had money, which was not something I had grown up around, in which I registered as a fact and set aside. Tom came from a family that had what people in certain circles call old wealth. Not obscenely so, not multiple houses and yachts, but a large family home, a successful business his father had built over 40 years, and a particular kind of quiet confidence that comes from never having had to worry about the fundamental things. His father, Jeffrey, was a tall, soft-spoken man who read history books and made excellent roast potatoes and called everyone old girl or old boy in a way that was entirely without condescension. I liked him immediately and completely, and I believe the feeling was mutual. Diana was different. I want to be careful here because I am aware that when a woman tells a story about a mother-in-law, there is a version of that story that is simply, she didn't like me from the beginning and I didn't like her and we were both right. I don't want to tell that story. What I want to tell you is the truth as accurately as I can remember it. The truth is that Diana was pleasant to me for the first year. Pleasantly distant, pleasantly polite. The kind of pleasant that functions as a form of assessment, warm enough to appear welcoming, cool enough to keep you at arm's length. She was meticulous about the house, always had been, Tom told me, and had very specific views about how things should be done. The right flowers, the right cutlery for the right occasion, the right way to hold a conversation at dinner, which involved never discussing money, never discussing politics, and always finding something complimentary to say about the food. I tried. I genuinely tried. I am not someone who gives up on relationships easily, especially family relationships. especially when the man I loved clearly adored his mother in the uncomplicated way that certain men adore their mothers. Not blindly but loyally, with a faith that is more about history than about proof. The first time I noticed something was wrong, really wrong, not just socially awkward or temperamentally mismatched, was about 18 months after Tom and I got together. We had just become properly serious. We had talked about the future in the specific, practical way that means something. I was at the family home for a Sunday lunch, and Diana and I were alone in the kitchen for a few minutes while Tom and Jeffrey were in the garden. Diana was arranging something on the counter, flowers, I think, or perhaps a fruit bowl. I don't remember the detail, and without looking at me she said very casually, "Tom has always been very susceptible to people who need things from him." I said, "I'm sorry." She looked up. She smiled. She said, "It's one of his loveliest qualities, really. He's so generous. You just have to hope people don't take advantage of it." She looked back at the flowers. I stood there for a moment. Then I went into the garden and found Tom. I didn't tell him what she'd said. I almost did many times over the years that followed. But I had learned from watching them together, from understanding the particular architecture of their relationship, that Tom would listen and would sympathize and would then find a way to reframe it. Not because he was weak or disloyal, but because the alternative, accepting that his mother was capable of calculated cruelty, was a thing he simply could not hold. So I held it for him. I held it for a long time. I want to tell you about the year before Jake was born, because that's when I started to understand, not fully, not yet, but in small, accumulating ways, exactly who Diana was, and what she was capable of, and what she had already started planning. Tom and I married when I was 29. It was a good wedding, not grand, not elaborate, exactly what we wanted. 60 people in a country house hotel on a September afternoon when the light was golden and everything smelled like cut grass and wood smoke. Jeffrey gave a speech that made everyone cry. Diana wore a dress the same shade of ivory as my wedding gown, which several people mentioned to me afterward, and which I chose to interpret as a coincidence. We bought a house about 40 minutes from Tom's parents, close enough for easy visits, far enough for an ordinary life. We settled in. We talked about children. Lily arrived when I was 30. Lily's arrival changed things with Diana in a way I had not anticipated. I had expected it to soften her. New grandmothers, in my experience, melt a little or a lot depending on the person. But the arrival of a grandchild generally does something to the architecture of a difficult relationship. Softens the edges, creates new common ground. What it did to Diana was something else. It made her territorial. Not about Lily exactly, about Tom, about her role. About the particular position she had always occupied, the most important woman in Tom's life, the one whose approval mattered most, the one whose opinion carried weight. Lily's arrival had shifted that. I had shifted that, just by existing and by being the person Tom chose to build a life with. And Diana had been quietly, carefully, with absolute deniability, making me pay for it ever since. Comments were never outright. Never something I could quote back directly and say, "Here, this is what she said, this is what she meant." They were always adjacent, wrapped in something else. A question about whether I was managing the feeding schedule that contained, if you knew how to hear it, an implication that I wasn't. A remark about how Lily looked just like the Hargreaves side, Tom's family name, delivered to a room full of people as though I was not in it. An observation, made once at Christmas with the particular timing of someone who has waited for the right moment, that some mothers find it very freeing to go back to work early. I had gone back to work at 6 months. We needed the income. I had never felt the need to defend this to anyone. I felt the need to defend it after Diana said that. I didn't. I smiled. I said something about loving my work. I went and found Tom, Tom who had not heard it, Tom who never quite heard it. Jeffrey became ill when Lily was 3. It was his heart, a series of small events that accumulated into something serious. The kind of illness that doesn't announce itself dramatically but settles in quietly and begins making its requirements known. He was in and out of hospital over the course of a year. He was, through all of it, exactly himself, reading his history books, making terrible jokes at the expense of the nursing staff who adored him, asking after Lily with the specific interest of a grandfather who had memorized her current favorite things and adjusted his conversation accordingly. Tom spent a lot of time with his father during this period. I encouraged it. There was nothing complicated about that decision. Jeffrey was ill, and Tom loved him, and time was uncertain. What I did not fully account for was what Diana did with Tom's attention while he was giving it to his father. She became, during Jeffrey's illness, the center of all things. The organizer of the medical appointments, the interpreter of the consultant's advice, the one who spoke for Jeffrey when Jeffrey was too tired to speak for himself. This was, in many ways, entirely reasonable. She was his wife. She was there. She managed things. But she also used that position, quietly, without anyone noticing except perhaps Jeffrey himself, who said to me once, only once, in a low voice while Tom was out of the room, something I have thought about many times since. He said, "Sarah, you're a good woman. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." He looked at me very directly when he said it. I said, "Thank you, Jeffrey." He said, "I mean it." He died 4 months before Jake was born. I think he knew things he never said aloud. I think he tried, in the only way available to him, to warn me. I didn't understand the warning until the letter arrived on that Thursday morning, 2 years later. I need to tell you what Diana did on the night Jake was born, because I didn't know about it for 2 years. 2 years of Sunday lunches and birthday parties and Christmas mornings and Easter eggs for the grandchildren. 2 years of smiling at a woman who had done something I cannot fully find words for, and had done it on the most vulnerable night of my life. Let me tell you, Jake's birth did not go as planned. I say this not for dramatic effect, but because it matters to the story, because the particular circumstances of that night make what Diana did more, not less, comprehensible. Incomprehensibility, I have found, is its own kind of horror. My labor started early, 3 weeks before my due date, in the middle of a Tuesday night. Tom called his mother, as we had arranged, to come and stay at the house with Lily. Diana arrived within 40 minutes, which told me she had been awake, or had not been deeply asleep. She was dressed, composed, carrying an overnight bag. Tom drove me to the hospital. The labor was long, 11 hours. There were complications, not life-threatening, but serious enough that there were more people in the room than I had expected, and more monitoring equipment, and a particular quality of focused attention from the medical team that told me, even through the exhaustion, that something needed watching. Tom was extraordinary. He held my hand for 11 hours. He did not leave the room once. He talked to me and was quiet when I needed quiet, and said the right things at the right moments in the particular way that he always had, steady, present, completely there. Jake was born at 3:17 in the morning. He was small but loud. He was absolutely fine. He was, in the exhausted, overwhelmed, incandescent way of all new parents, the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Tom cried, I cried. The midwife, who had been doing this for 20 years, smiled at us in the way that people smile when they have witnessed the same miracle repeatedly and have never once become immune to it. We called Diana from the hospital at around 4 a.m. to tell her Jake had arrived safely. She said all the right things. She was relieved. She was delighted. She couldn't wait to see him. She sounded warm. She sounded like a grandmother who had spent a worrying night and was now exhaling. What I did not know, what I would not know for 2 years, was that between the time Tom and I had left for the hospital and the time we called her at 4 a.m., Diana had made a phone call of her own to a solicitor. Her solicitor. A man who had handled the family's affairs for years, who was available to Diana at any hour, who had, as I would later learn from the letter, been instructed by her some weeks earlier to be ready. She had called him. She had instructed him to proceed with the amendment she had requested. And the following morning, while Tom and I were still in the hospital, while Jake was still in his little hospital cot, while Lily was at home being told by her grandmother that she had a baby brother, the will was amended. My children were removed as beneficiaries. The shares of Jeffrey's estate that had been designated for them, money Jeffrey had specifically, in earlier conversations with Tom, intended for his grandchildren's futures, were redirected. To a cousin of Tom's who lived abroad. To a charity Diana supported. To various places that were not my children. She had planned it. She had waited for a moment when Tom would be unreachable, fully, legitimately, emotionally unreachable, and she had done it. And then she had driven back to our house, put Lily to bed, and waited for us to come home. I have spent a long time trying to understand why. Not to excuse it, not to find a reason that makes it acceptable, but because understanding is the thing that separates you from the confusion of it, and I needed to not be confused anymore. Here is what I think. Diana had never accepted that Jeffrey's money, the money he had built over 40 years, was anything other than hers. Not theirs, hers. She had been beside him while he built it. She had managed the household, raised Tom, maintained the life that Jeffrey's work made possible. And in her mind, which I believe is a mind organized around a very particular kind of self-preservation, that contribution was not equal to Jeffrey's, it was greater. She had tolerated me because she had to. Tom loved me, and Tom was her son, and she was not willing to lose Tom. But my children, Jake and Lily, represented something she had not bargained for. A permanent claim on the estate. A future in which Jeffrey's money went to people who were, in her estimation, only partly from the right family. I was the wrong kind of woman. Not in any way she would have said aloud, but in the way that certain people communicate what they believe in the accumulation of small signals. I had always known that Diana considered me, with my ordinary background, my working parents, my state school education, my insistence on going back to work at 6 months, to be not quite what she had in mind for Tom. My children were half mine. And that was, for Diana, half too much. So she waited. She waited for a moment of maximum cover, a moment when Tom was undeniably, irreproachably elsewhere, and she acted. I am not giving her credit for intelligence by saying this. I am saying she was calculating. There is a difference. Before I tell you how I found out, I need to stop for a second. Because if you have ever been in a family where someone smiled at you with one face and worked against you with another, I want to hear from you. Leave me a comment below. And if this story is making your blood boil, give it a like so more women can find it, because they need to hear this. Okay. The letter. The 2 years between Jake's birth and the letter were, from the outside, entirely ordinary. We visited Tom's parents, his mother now, on Sundays. We had Christmas at her house. Diana played with the grandchildren in the careful, slightly performative way of someone who understands that grandmothering is, in part, a display. She bought good presents. She remembered Jake's preference for dinosaurs and Lily's preference for anything that could be painted. She was never unkind to them, never cold. Whatever she felt about their existence, she directed none of it toward them. She directed it toward me. Still adjacent, still deniable. A comment at a family gathering attended by Tom's cousin Edward, the one who had been quietly enriched by Jeffrey's amended will, though I did not know this yet, about how some daughters-in-law never quite become family, and that's all right, not everyone does. Said lightly to a room of people who laughed or smiled or looked into their drinks. Tom had heard that one. He said afterward in the car home that he was sure she hadn't meant it the way it sounded. I said, "Tom, how did it sound?" He was quiet for a moment. He said, "I'll speak to her." He did speak to her. I don't know what was said. The comments became slightly less frequent for a while. That was the outcome. I accepted it. Because this is what you do for years in families where there is a difficult person at the center. You manage and you adapt, and you tell yourself that the children are happy and the marriage is good and the difficult person is old and not forever. And you find the grace somewhere within yourself to keep showing up. I found the grace. I showed up. And every Sunday for 2 years, I sat across a lunch table from a woman who had changed a will the night my son was born, and I did not know it. I want to tell you about Aunt Margaret before I tell you about the letter, because without Aunt Margaret, I might never have understood what the letter meant. She was Jeffrey's sister, 71 years old. She had lived alone since her husband died a decade ago in a cottage in Wiltshire that she filled with books and plants and a large, opinionated tabby cat called Morrison. She came to family events occasionally. She was not close to Diana. She called me, not Tom, me, about 3 months before the letter arrived. She said she wanted to have lunch. Just the two of us. She said she had been thinking about something for a long time and wanted to talk to me about it. We met at a pub near her cottage. She ordered fish and chips. She drank half a glass of white wine and pushed the rest aside. And then she looked at me across the table with the direct, unhurried gaze of a woman who has decided to do the right thing after a considerable period of internal debate, and she said, "Sarah, I need to tell you something about Jeffrey's will." She had known, not everything, she didn't have access to the legal documents, but she had known that Diana had made calls, had had meetings, had done something in the period around Jake's birth. She had heard things. She had been uncertain for a long time about what was her business to say. She had finally decided that it was. She told me what she knew. She told me to contact the solicitor who had handled Jeffrey's estate. She had the name, and to ask for the documentation. She said, "I loved my brother, and I know he would not have wanted this." I drove home. I sat in the car outside my house for a long time, and then I went inside and I said nothing to Tom, and I made the children's dinner, and I put them to bed, and I waited until the house was quiet. And then I called the solicitor's office and requested the documentation. The letter arrived 6 weeks later. It was everything Aunt Margaret had told me it would be, and worse. The original will, Jeffrey's will, the one he had made several years before his death, had included provisions for his grandchildren. Not enormous sums, but meaningful ones. Education funds. A foundation for their future. The specific language of a man who had built something over a lifetime and wanted it to outlast him in the people he loved. The amended will, amended on the night Jake was born, signed by Diana as the surviving spouse exercising her right to alter the discretionary provisions, removed those provisions entirely. Jake and Lily were not mentioned. The money that had been designated for them had been redistributed. Some of it went to the charity. Some went to the cousin. I sat at the kitchen table and I read the letter 3 times. The third time I noticed my hands were completely still. I found that interesting. I had expected to shake. I didn't. Something had settled inside me, something that had been slightly off balance for years, some internal thing that had been waiting for the confirmation of what it had always half known. I thought about Jeffrey saying, "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I thought about Diana arriving at our house at 4 in the morning with an overnight bag already packed. I thought about 2 years of Sunday lunches. I picked up my phone and I called Aunt Margaret. I said, "I have the letter." She said, "I know, I'm so sorry, my love." I said, "I need to know what my options are." She said, "I know a solicitor." I told Tom on a Saturday morning. The children were at my parents' for the weekend. I had planned this not coldly, not manipulatively, but deliberately. I needed him to be able to hear me without managing them at the same time. I sat him down at the kitchen table. I put the letter in front of him. I put the original will documentation beside it. I said, "I need you to read these." He read them slowly. I watched his face, the face of a man I had known for 8 years, the face of someone I loved, go through several things in a short space of time. Disbelief first. Then confusion. Then the particular blankness that comes when your mind is encountering something it does not have a category for. He looked up. He said, "This is dated the night Jake was born." I said, "Yes." He said, "She was at our house with Lily." I said, "She made the call before we left for the hospital. She had arranged it in advance." He put the letter down. He was quiet for a very long time, long enough that I stopped trying to read his silence and simply let it be what it was. He said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't." He said, "Sarah, I said, "Tom, I need to know what you're going to do." This I had decided was the right question. Not, "How could she?" Not, "I can't believe it." Not, "What does this mean for us, for our marriage, for everything?" Those questions would come, they did come later in the long weeks that followed. But in that moment, the only question that mattered was the one that would tell me who Tom was going to be. He said, "I'm going to fix it." He said it quietly, without drama. In the same steady way he had held my hand for 11 hours in a delivery room. I said, "Okay. I want to tell you about the confrontation with Diana because Tom arranged it. He called her and asked her to come to our house. He didn't tell her why. And when she walked through the door, when she saw the documents on the table, I watched something happen in her face that I had never seen there before. Something cracked, and what was underneath it was not what I expected. Diana arrived on the following Tuesday. She was dressed as she always was, careful, composed, a silk scarf she'd had for years that I had seen at every significant occasion. She kissed Tom. She looked at me. She looked at the documents on the kitchen table. She did not ask what they were, which told me she already knew. Tom said, "Mum, sit down." She sat. He talked for a while. He was not angry, not in the explosive way, not in the way I had half expected and half dreaded. He was something worse than angry. He was calm and clear and specific, in the way of someone who has spent several days deciding exactly what they need to say and will not be moved from it. He laid out everything. The dates, the timing, the original provisions and the amended ones. The night Jake was born. Diana listened. And when he finished, she said something that I have thought about many times since. Not because it was surprising in retrospect, it was entirely in character, but because of how completely it revealed her. She said, "I did what I believed was right for this family." Tom said, "Jake and Lily are this family." She said, "They are, but the money Jeffrey built, that was built for our family, our name, our history. I had a responsibility to protect that." I said, and this was the first time I had spoken, and my voice was completely level. I said, "Your husband included our children in his original will. That was his wish. You changed it the night one of those children was born, while his own son was in a hospital." She looked at me. For the first time in 8 years, she looked at me without the layer of pleasantness, without the careful management. She looked at me with the actual face underneath it. And what I saw was not hatred, not triumph. something stranger and sadder than either. What I saw was a woman who believed, completely and without question, that she was right, that what she had done was not a betrayal but a correction, that her judgment about what Jeffrey's legacy deserved was superior to Jeffrey's own expressed wishes. She believed it entirely. I think that is the most chilling thing, more than the act itself. The absolute absence of doubt. Tom said, "I'd like you to leave now." She said, "Thomas." He said, "Mum, please leave." She left. The legal situation was not simple. Diana had acted within her rights as the surviving spouse in amending the discretionary provisions of the will. Our solicitor, the one Aunt Margaret had recommended, a sharp and thorough woman named Helen, was honest with us about this from the beginning. There was no clear-cut fraud. There was no guarantee of reclaiming the full amount. What there was, Helen explained, was a strong case for contesting the amendment on the grounds of undue influence and the specific circumstances of its timing. It would take time. It would cost money. It would not be resolved quickly. We decided to proceed. Tom paid for the legal fees from savings. He did this without being asked, without discussion, simply told me one evening that he had transferred the money to the solicitor's account, and that we would see it through however long it took. I did not thank him for this, not because I wasn't grateful, but because it seemed to me that this was simply what was right, that it required no thanks, only the doing. Diana, through her own solicitor, initially contested our challenge. She maintained her position. She was certain of her ground. And then, 6 months into the process, something happened that none of us had anticipated. Jeffrey's personal diaries were found. Tom had been going through boxes of his father's belongings that had been in storage since the house had been sold after Diana moved to a smaller place. He had been doing it slowly, in the way of people who are not ready to finish the task of grieving. And in a cardboard box that smelled of old paper and something faintly of his father's particular aftershave, he found 3 years of diaries. Jeffrey had written about the will. He had written about his wishes for his grandchildren. He had written, clearly, in the considered prose of a man who had always thought carefully before he spoke, about his concern that those wishes might not be honored. He had written in an entry dated 8 months before his death, "Diana does not agree with what I intend to leave to the children. I have made my wishes known. I can only hope they are respected. I am not confident that they will be." He had known. Our solicitor described the diaries as highly significant. Diana's solicitor advised her to settle. She settled, not the full amount, these things never resolve completely, but enough. Enough to fund exactly what Jeffrey had intended: education accounts for both children, a foundation for their futures. The settlement was agreed on a Tuesday afternoon. Tom called me from the car park outside the solicitor's office. He said, "It's done." I said, "It's done." We were both quiet for a moment. He said, "Dad knew." I said, "I know." Diana and Tom speak occasionally. Not often. There is a distance between them that I do not think will fully close, and I am not sure it should. She has not apologized to me. I do not expect her to. An apology would require acknowledging that she was wrong, and Diana does not have the architecture for that acknowledgement. What she did was, in her own internal framework, justified. The only things that moved her were legal consequences, not moral ones. I do not hate her. I want to be honest about that, because I think people expect the story to end with hatred, and it doesn't. What I feel for Diana is something much more tedious than hatred. It is a kind of clear-eyed assessment, an understanding of who she is, what she is capable of, and how much access to my life she is therefore permitted. The answer is very little. She sees the grandchildren at Christmas. She sees them on their birthdays. These visits are managed and brief, and the children are always glad to see her because children love their grandmothers regardless of what their grandmothers have done, and that is as it should be. Beyond that, she is not part of our daily life. That is not punishment. It is simply the logical consequence of knowledge. I know who she is now. I arrange my life accordingly. What I think about most, when I think about all of this, is Jeffrey, a man who built something over a lifetime and tried in the only ways available to him to ensure it reached the people he loved, who saw in the last months of his life what was coming, who said to me once quietly while Tom was out of the room, "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I didn't fully understand it then. I understand it now. He was not warning me about Diana specifically. He was telling me something about myself, about the particular danger, for women like me, of being managed out of our own confidence by people who are very skilled at making us feel that our instincts are wrong, that what we sense is not real, that the pleasantness is genuine and we are being uncharitable. Our instincts are rarely wrong. I had known from the night Diana arrived with her overnight bag already packed that something was not right. I had set it aside. I had called it uncharitable. I had smiled across lunch tables for 2 years. I will not do that again, not for Diana, not for anyone. That is the thing I took from this. Not the settlement, not the legal victory such as it was. The knowledge that what I sense is real. That my instincts are mine and they are worth listening to. That the grace I extend to people who have not earned it is not a virtue, it is a vulnerability. And I am allowed to choose when to extend it and when to withdraw. The children are 7 and 4 now. Jake is obsessed with trains. Lily has decided she wants to be an architect. On Sunday mornings when the house is warm and noisy, and someone always needs something and Biscuit the dog is underfoot, and Tom is making too much coffee, and someone has spilled something and everything is exactly the ordinary chaos of a family that is simply, gratefully alive in its own life. In those moments, I think of Jeffrey. I think of 3 years of diaries in a cardboard box. I think of a man who hoped his wishes would be respected, who wrote it down because writing things down is how careful people make themselves heard across time. He was heard. In the end, he was heard. Here is what I want to leave you with today. The people who work against you in silence are counting on your silence in return. They are counting on the grace you extend to them. They are counting on the fact that you will smile across the table and say nothing and go home and tell yourself you are being uncharitable. You are not being uncharitable. You are being managed, and you are allowed to stop. You are allowed to open the letter. You are allowed to call the solicitor. You are allowed to sit across the table from a woman who has smiled at you for 8 years and say calmly, clearly, without drama, "I know what you did." And then you are allowed to arrange your life accordingly. That is not revenge. That is simply finally choosing yourself. If someone in your family has ever worked against you in silence, if you have ever smiled across a table at someone who was not what they appeared, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if Sarah's story moved you today, share it with one woman in your life who needs to hear it. She might not know she needs it yet. Hit subscribe for a new story every day. I'll see you there.